Welcome to Authentic Living with Roxanne on Global Voice Radio. Join Roxanne Derhodge and her thought-provoking conversations, the catalyst to live your life to the fullest.
Hi, everyone. Welcome back to Authentic Living with Roxanne. I have a very, very special guest today, a dear friend of mine, and her name is Kindi Gill. I hope I've said that correctly. She's a CEO from the UK, and in the past, she's been responsible for over 3,000 people in leadership and empowerment. She's now a revolutionary facilitator in a method, a Dalian method, or health and consciousness, and which she's the founder of Spark Expansion Consulting, something that I've tried, and I can tell you that I'm blown away by some of the changes I've seen in myself. Kindi specializes in family transformation for busy leaders and executives, helping them to find a peaceful presence at home and at work. She helps her clients silence the source of triggers, and conscious bias, judgment, anger, and fears. Her overall objective is to free people from themselves so they can meet the challenge of experiencing home life and work life in expansive, abundant ways. Thank you, Kindi, for being here.
Thanks for inviting me, Roxanne.
Not a problem. So that's a fascinating story, going from CEO to now transformational coach. And I'd really like to hear a little bit about that process and kind of how you got from there to here.
It wasn't something I expected, because obviously as children we have ideas about what we want to do in life. And for me, it was very clear that I wanted to use my skill set. I was extremely mathematical, very logical, and able to achieve goals relatively easily. And I remember flicking through the career books and thinking, what am I going to do? And it felt like chartered accountancy is something I ought to be pursuing. And from that, I went into management consultancy, and then I became a finance director for a business, and for the same business became their chief executive, and was in that industry for about 20 odd years, 17 years in the same company. And when I was approaching my 40th birthday, a number of reasons for why I ended up exiting from that company, but there was a sense of completion. Like, for example, my life and the career that I had had and the extreme stress that I carried during that time as a chief executive, I felt like those days were over and my time as a leader in industry was over. And really it was more appropriate for me to put my energy into my home life and my family life. But I wasn't to know that I'm going to go full circle and look to help people again at some point, because when I started working in the home environment, so to speak, I found that it was a lot tougher to be able to lead with ease and a lot tougher to be able to create that harmony that is easier to achieve in the boardroom or in the workplace, because people come into the workplace for a job and there is an exchange. They're getting cash or some benefit in exchange for their services. They have a bigger picture in mind about their responsibility that they have for the company. But in the home, a lot more happens that drives the triggers. A lot more honesty about the things that cause us stress get revealed, and our wounds surface. And I just found myself in this mire of situations where I really wanted to be able to create the peace and harmony at home, and I wanted to understand why it was eluding me. And so therefore, a lot of work started to happen, which was around the judgments and the arguments and the differences of opinion and the clashes that arise. And at those early stages, all I was looking to do was to improve my family life. I had no intention of doing anything beyond that. But because the power of the Dalian method that we ended up using in our home was so extremely potent, it just seemed more appropriate at a certain point down the path to start sharing the beauty of this method with other people. And hence I found myself in the transformation industry, now helping to lead and empower people in a brand new way, but in a way that really energizes them, motivates them. So like I feel the circle came back round to the original start point. And now the benefit I'm bringing for people is exponentially powerful than it would have been when I was actually a chief exec.
So interesting, right? So, having also been an executive, what it kind of sounds like, as a CEO, you kind of get things done, right? You kind of go in and you lead, and everybody kind of are supposed to do what you do, what they need to do because of what you're putting out in a day. But it sounds like at home, it really kind of puts you at a different space, because we can go to work sometimes 10, 12 hours and be able to prolong that persona in order to achieve what we need to. But at home, it's a little bit different, right? It's almost like we drop our guard when we walk through the door, and then, the real Kindi or the real Roxanne comes out. Would that be fair to say?
Yeah, I mean, you call this authentic living. And what is true for most of us, I don't know how honest everybody is about it, but what is true for most of us, that when we come into the home environment, we don't have as much energy or as much resource available, really, for the people that are around us. Mm-hmm. And we are so comfortable in their presence that sometimes our emotional intelligence, or the guard that helps to keep us emotionally intelligent in the workplace, that falls away. And we have more of our own needs that come to the surface. So in a work environment, you know what your role is, you know what you're being asked to do, you know what your objectives are, you're fulfilling that vision. So there's a responsibility that you have to other people. Whereas in the home environment, you go back to a little bit like the child that was being nurtured and looked after and raised and given and given and given. There's a part of us when we come into the home environment when we suddenly expect to receive, and we expect to be nurtured. And those expectations drive a lot of the clashes.
So tell me, because from a psychotherapist's point of view, mm-hmm. You hear the term triggers all the time, right? Yeah. And I know how we address it in the field. So I'm curious, in psychotherapy or psychology, we teach people to identify it. We teach them how to kind of understand what they say to themselves and how their behavior gets impacted. So tell me how the Dalian method is different or bigger of a bigger scope in reference to some of the things that I'm talking about here.
So everything that you're describing is a great start point, because you need to be aware of your interaction with another human being. Mm-hmm. So the first point is when you're talking about getting somebody to understand that a trigger arose, that's a start point. Mm-hmm. An argument or a set of tears or a difference of opinion, there's a clash of some sort that's arisen. So with the Dalian method, what it does is it avoids using the mind at all. So in psychotherapy, obviously, we're engaging the mind to assist us in understanding how we got triggered. But with the Dalian method, it says, okay, let's not start there, because a lot of what the ego mind is made up of is a whole history of circumstances and experiences that it's got bottled up that have led to a load of conclusions. Mm-hmm. And those conclusions are driving our subjectivity, our objectivity, our judgment, our perception, our expectation, our need. Like, it drives all of that. So what the Dalian method says is, let's not start there, because the problem actually is in the mind itself, because it's the one that has the judgment and it's the one that has a certain bias. But more understand where that bias came from in the cells of your body. And it's not just curious about where did it come from, so therefore we've got a rational explanation for why the trigger arose. It goes one step under and says, okay, so we now know where it came from, but mm-hmm. underneath that, why did you have to have had that experience or that conclusion in your particular life? And what was the ultimate lesson behind that conclusion or trigger that you're being shown? And then once you get into the ultimate lesson, consciousness sets you free through self-awareness, because the lesson is the unique message that helps you to understand yourself. And if, bottom line, if we knew who we are, if we ultimately knew who we are inside, we would not get triggered by any other human being, because we would actually know that we're full of certain qualities that can never be taken away from us. So all the triggers around.
Interesting. That's very, very unique perspective, because again, me with the hat that I, have worn, and having tried this, of course, I'm not conscious what I went through, other than I know it really helped me.
Yeah.
But what we often say in our field is that you'll get triggered till the day you die. That's something that you hear psychotherapists and psychologists say all the time. But you're actually saying the opposite. You're saying, if I come into who I really am, then I will be triggerless.
That's right. You get to a point where you take responsibility for everything that belongs to you. And the truth is, I mean, I've been working with the Dalian method since 2008. So, close to, in fact, just over 9 years now. And the truth is that the concepts and the topics and the things that triggered me 9 years ago don't even touch me now. And inside, in my belly area, is this sort of very spacious piece that progressively has just got bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger. Now, when a new trigger arises, immediately I know that inside that trigger is another lesson that I need to learn. And I'm willing to go and delve and look for it, because the process is so mathematical. It will always give you the awareness to understand what your particular lesson is. But if I'm in a peaceful state and the world is running around me, outside of me, and I'm just watching it as an observer and nothing's touching me, I'm in my center, I'm in my core, I have a closer attachment to who I am, and all of life is just progressing in that way.
So in a way, you become a watcher.
You become a very, very acute witnesser of all the events around you. And those that cause you to flare up or be judgmental or to be triggered are the clues to the fact that there's a part of you that you haven't yet seen.
Wow. So when you say that, I guess maybe the viewers will want, I know the question I have is, so like, how many sessions does it take? Is that a fair question? How long is it? Those types of things. Because I'm not sure, if it's a long-term thing or if is it by issue, those types of things. If you can share that.
Okay, well, so the question about how long is it and how many sessions, again, varies, right? So there's a version for adults, and then there's a version for young adults, one for teenagers and one for children.
Okay.
As you go through the entire family spectrum, as you get into a younger and younger age group, the method length gets shorter and shorter and shorter, even though mathematically it's still doing the same thing. So the good news with that is that even though as parents we worry about some of our own personality traits and that we may have passed them on genetically to our children, they can be helped from as young as 5 years old upwards. The second part of your question is the method has been created in a way where it is very simple to self-use. So the idea is that over time, our need to find a therapist outside of us will fall away, because we will know exactly how to assist ourselves and tap back and claim back our own power. So that's the second point. And then the third point is how many sessions. So what I've found is that we've had a variety of types of clients. I'm a facilitator of this method. I got trained back in 2015 with adults first, then with teenagers, and then with children. And what I find is it depends on what age group we're looking at. Some of my older clients, maybe those that are like in their 50s or late 60s or sort of in that age group, are so blown away by the potency of the Dalian method and how quickly it eradicates old history and just re-energizes you into a new state, that a lot of those clients didn't want to let go of the facilitation part, because it was like, hang on a minute, I've just done more work in one session that took us an hour and a half to do. Well, it takes an hour and a half for the session and about an hour to educate you as to how to use it. So I did more work in 2.5 hours than I have in the last decade. So those people go, okay, I'm going deeper and deeper and deeper, which is exactly how I was. So I was around 42-ish years old when I first came across the Dalian method, and I worked directly with Mada Dalian. And even though I didn't understand after my first session what had actually happened, I knew innately inside me that I felt completely different. And then when I went back again later on in 2009, and I think my second session was around 8 months later, I got a better understanding of what consciousness was doing and how I was being set free from my own monkey mind. And the power of it, Roxanne, was so big that I made a commitment to myself that anything that now happens in my life that causes me some sort of heartache or upset or judgment or trigger, I would be a fool to keep those qualities when now I have a liberating process that can set me free. And so a combination of two things began to happen. One was that I would either work directly with Mada and experience the Dalian method with her, or once the self-healing version of it got created, which was in 2014, it was formally introduced to the world. Then from then onwards, I knew that I had a self-sufficient way to help myself too. And this is what applies to everybody that's listening to this, is that initially, clearly you want to be taught how. And if you would like to be shown how to ride the bike and somebody sort of holds your hand through that process, makes it a lot easier, then people like myself are there to facilitate that for you. But over time, you get liberated to know how to do this work on your own and maintain it. And the speed at which you go is your own pace. The regularity with which you actually experience the session is also at your own pace. It can be 6 months apart or 8 months apart, or it can be shorter periods of like 6 weeks apart. But for each person, it becomes a different length.
Interesting. So really, I can kind of think of people that have been trying to create change. And we know what we know about talk therapy with neuroscience is that there's so much more need to include the body, right? So cognitively, we can talk about thoughts and feelings, but what was glaringly missing in the field was the use of, the body. And there's been a lot of therapies that have come about since, some, the different methods like EMDR or sensory motor. So this sounds like this is even a deeper, when you talk consciousness, I guess, if you can explain or give an example of that, I think that's the question I have in my mind. Like, how do you know that you're a deeper consciousness?
Okay, so first of all, yes, there's loads of great modalities, and it might sound biased and a little bit arrogant for me to say this, but I'm saying it from a place of knowing rather than a place of sort of being egotistical about it, that the Dalian method is almost like that cherry on the top. It's like that 1,200 carat diamond. And there's only one that's been discovered in the last 100 years. And that diamond was actually found by a Vancouver-based mining company. So I find it really funny in some ways that Mada is based in Vancouver and she's created a method that has the same level of purity as a rare diamond like that. So why the method is so extremely potent is because it's very bonded. Like a lot of modalities will have an aspect about like bringing the body in or releasing an emotion, or it may have an aspect to do with like finding the original imprint. So there's an element of release that's arising, or some modalities like EFT, they're even attempting to help grow your awareness and you're tapping in new ways of living. What the Dalian method does is it says, we already know that you are pure. We already know that you're totally abundant. We already know that you're full of love. We already know that you are consciousness, which is all of these qualities. And because there's a knowing that ultimately all that needs to happen is anything unconscious in you is waiting to be transformed into consciousness and thus light that constitutes any of those facets, and consciousness is all knowing, all powerful, and at the same time it's capable of limitless creative ideas, and it's silent. So the Dalian method works with that premise that it knows every human being is that. And so there is nothing to be added to you to help you to awaken to your own consciousness. All that needs to happen is anything that's unconscious in you, that you're blind to, that acts as a blind spot, that acts as an area where you're not aware that it's still running inside you like a virus program. All that needs to happen is that needs to be transformed back to its nature of light.
So really what you're coming from is from a place of fullness.
Absolutely.
So it's almost like, you're saying to the, I often say when we, see people, we see children, they are, perfect in their entirety coming into the world, but it's almost like we rub away the shininess, and then they kind of get blunted or dull by life. So that's basically what you're saying, is like, we are whole, we are conscious, we are abundant, we are full.
But we don't know that.
Yeah,
but we don't know
that. Think like that. They think that something's wrong with me if there's been violence or if there's been abuse of any sort. They think that something's wrong with them.
Yes, and all of us cannot ever hear these concepts and say, I get it. Because that's not a knowing. A knowing is an experience of that. So like, for example, if I was to say to you, I know that I can dive into the deep end of a swimming pool. Now that knowing comes from a previous experience where I've dived into the deep end of a swimming pool, and I know that I'm not going to drown, and I know that I can swim, and I know that I can cope, and I can tread water. So it's a knowing that comes from an experience. The same is with the Dalian method. So as you grow in consciousness of all of these facets of yourself, you get to experience that knowing of you inside you. It isn't a theory that somebody is describing to you and saying that you are love. It is a physical knowing of this well of love inside you that is just abundantly sharing, and there's no end to it. You get to experience these qualities.
So I know you've shared before in other conversations with me a bit about Mata, and kind of like she's she can x-ray people or get a sense, right? So I think I found that very fascinating. So if you wouldn't mind sharing a little bit about kind of the process that she went through, and a bit about how it got developed, because I think that to me was very fascinating. I'm going to assume that it would be the same for the listeners.
Yes, because I can't be talking about this quality of purity and this quality of potency unless this method has come from somebody that's reached the peak of where we can reach as human beings. So Mata came from Armenia, and she, I think, originally was sort of around the Montreal area. I'm not quite sure, but I think it was around the Montreal area that she first arrived in Canada. And she dropped her education because she had been trained as a teacher and I think she had done a degree in architecture and as a teacher, but very quickly fell into the hands at around age 24 of a woman who acted like a bit of a mentor, that gave her a book from a mystic in India called Osho.
Okay.
And it was a book about socialism. And this book basically like blew her mind, because the contents of it had so much truth in it about the country that she had just left. And so that intrigued her to understand more about this mystic. And at the age of 24, she became very, very devoted to meditating, to the path of self-discovery. And at the very young age, when she was about 5 years old, she had watched her grandfather die. And somehow, cognitively, she understood that if he's just died and life is continuing on without him today, that means I'm going to die and life is going to continue on without me too. So at the age of 5, she immediately came to that awareness that said, so if I'm going to die and I'm only here for a short while, then what am I doing here? Who am I? And why am I here? So
at five, wow.
So she asked those potent questions at that age. Who am I? And that's the ultimate question for all of us to ask. Who am I? And so her energy was already channeled into wanting to know more about herself and to wanting to discover who she really was. And so she fell into the hands of this amazing, amazing mystic. And with the work that he'd created some very, very practical tools, active meditations to help you to get the experience of knowing who you are. And so at the age of 33, she became enlightened and had the same awakening experience that the Buddha had when he was on the planet. So at that point, now she knows who she is. So her quest has been, her like dying question has been solved. But of course, she's only 33 years old.
Wow, so she's quite young at this point still.
That's right. And so after that, it became, okay, so now I know who I am. So I still am in this world. So what am I going to do next? It's like, okay, hands up. What am I doing next? And this is where she was reunited with her childhood gift. And her childhood gift is like, you know how the two of us are having a conversation right now? Mm-hmm. Even as the listeners are listening to me, they're hearing my words, but there'll be another conversation happening inside about what they're hearing.
Right.
So from a child, Mada could always hear the inside conversation.
Of what you're not saying.
Like, for example, I'm just making this up. So like you could have an aunt that comes to visit and on the surface, she's saying, hi, sweetheart, really happy to see you. But inside she's saying, I'm really tired. I'm really exhausted. Keep out of my way. Right. So Mada could hear the insincerity of the outside conversation and could hear the truth of the inside conversation.
Wow. And
so when she became enlightened, she was reunited with that gift, which is a bit bizarre to be able to hear this other stuff going on side and the insincerity of all of that. So she wanted to understand, what are these thoughts people are having and why are they even there? And how can we turn these thoughts into conscious light? And that's how she began to experiment with what she was hearing. And soon she was able to see as well inside people, and a combination of being able to hear and see inside people. And then it became that she was very empathic. And so she could feel what was happening inside us too. So the combination of all those three things helped her to create this mathematical formula of releasing the debris that's inside, that's forming that conversation inside, and getting to the point where it gets turned into conscious light and unity begins to unfold.
I mean, like I said, it sounds fascinating. So yeah. I'm just curious, can you kind of give us a sense of some of the steps? Like, let's say someone comes in, what should they expect? I'm going to assume that, I know prior to me meeting you, I had no idea about any of this.
Yeah.
So for the average person that probably has seen a coach, has seen a psychotherapist, has seen a psychologist, kind of like how does this kind of compare? Or, I mean, not that we're trying to compare and contrast, but just what should they expect of the experience if they were to come in or have an online session with you?
Okay. So first of all, there's a short amount of time spent understanding the person's story.
Okay.
So that's the cognitive conversation, the one that they might have with a psychotherapist or somebody else too. So a very short amount of the appointment is allotted to that. And there's a prescript formula that gets sent out to the prospective client on how to prepare for that and how to keep the focus on the right matters. And so once that conversation has been had, now what is more important is to understand why that life circumstance is taking place and what it is that that person needs to see or learn about themselves to set themselves free from that life circumstance. So the end result of the session is always a growth in awareness. So they discover something about themselves. It is accompanied with deep relaxation that stays with them. And the growth in awareness will bring in a new understanding as to how to interact in the world. And that new understanding becomes automatic.
So it may not be a conscious change, but it may just be something that you're finding from that inner peace, you're interacting in a different way with the world.
Yes, because the consciousness has already come in during the session. So what will happen is that your behavior will match your new awareness. And for a short while, it'll feel like, wow, I'm doing this, that I wasn't doing this before. And for a while, you'll keep noticing it. And then as the weeks progress, it just gets integrated as your new way of living. And then this new way of living is just who you are. So I'll give you an example. I'll use one from my daughter, and then I'll use one from a client. So my youngest daughter, at the time, was only 9 years old and was afraid to read out aloud in a classroom. And so she had visited Madda and had had a child session with Madda. And the fear of reading out aloud was removed. So people often say, feel the fear and do it anyway. But sometimes the fear is so intense that your ability to act on the do it anyway is not going to arise. You're paralyzed in that fear. So her ability to speak up in a classroom was fairly non-existent. And after this session, what happened was, I think the session was only an hour long for a child. Then Madda gave her a book and asked her to read out aloud.
At the end of the session.
Yeah.
Amazing.
And Saffron still remembers that moment where the book was handed to her and suddenly her ability to string the sentences together in a fluid way were just there. So this is the behavioral change. It arose instantly. Once the awareness had come in and she had broken the cycle of the trap that she was in, where she was afraid to speak out aloud. So that's a small example, but it helps you to understand how the behavior shifts instantly.
Which is refreshing, right? Because I think of, some people with, complex trauma, like violence and sexual abuse and those types of things. I mean, those clients live with so much pain, right?
Yeah.
So it's just the thought that could be cleared in a short period of time, I think it lights my heart up to be even perceive that as being a possibility, Kindi.
That's right. And so many people talk about miraculous results. And the truth is, most that experience the Dalian method use that phrase. This was miraculous. The outcome of this was nothing short of miraculous. It becomes a very typical phrase. And I know that more and more people that get to use this method, the days will go when we're even perceiving that certain transformation is miraculous, because they'll see it just unfold under their nose.
Well, I mean, and just hearing that, I could just imagine for anybody that has those things that they've kind of cycled through and gone back over and over again, that would be something that I'm thinking, wow, to be able to shift something that can be that entrenched in someone, I think would be truly a gift.
That brings me to the example that I wasn't sure which client example I was going to use, but it seems like it's the appropriate one. So I had a client that had been seeing a therapist for 2 years, had been getting some counseling help. And the issue was that she had been abused as a child, and the abuse had happened from family members, as often it is the case. And at the end of our session together, she understood why the abuse had happened. She understood the lesson that it was designed to teach her. And she also felt forgiveness towards the perpetrators, because she felt that expanded in light. And at the end of that meeting, she said to me, and she looked around at me and she said, I don't need a counselor anymore, do I?
Wow. So,
said,
on average, it takes years and years.
She'd been seeing somebody for 2 years.
Yes, absolutely.
And this was her first session with the Dalian method. And there's a point where you go into the back of your head and the past life trauma and history around the experience resurfaces. And then when we move further on into the method, it takes you into your third eye, which will then awaken you to your knowing and your lesson behind the experience. It was so profound for me to watch the learning that she had as a result of that, and it's going to sound bizarre, that a degree of not only relaxation, but almost a sense of gratitude for the fact that the experience even arose in the first place, because the liberation was so massive that without that pain and hurt, that liberation wasn't going to arise for her. And this is what I mean by unity. Nobody stays in a victim state. Nobody stays in a place where they're experiencing blame or anger or upset towards another human being.
Mm-hmm.
You understand your life experiences from a new dimension, and your judgments towards others and perpetrators and all that type of stuff systematically fall away. Now, this particular client had so much happen in one session, her very first session. And I remember her writing back saying that was life-changing.
Well, I'm listening to this because you and I have never chatted about this in the past.
No.
And I know how traumatic putting context to abuse outside of yourself, especially when you're younger, it's some of the most difficult things that I've seen, unfortunately, as a psychotherapist. And it oftentimes, the perception is the person believes, I am depressed, I am suicidal. That becomes their identity, versus recognizing that it's a symptom, right? I cut or I do this or that because they embody the symptoms, and then they forget really that that's not who they are. That's the symptoms that came about from the trauma. So I think
the pain is creating that. And it's the identification that the mind and the ego has to that pain that perpetuates the cycle of what happens in the darkness and the heaviness that comes as a result of it.
Mm-hmm.
But as soon as a person is able to break the chain to the pain and the identification to the story, and they step outside of it, when they've stepped outside of it and they see what it was all about, then they're free.
Wow. Powerful. Truly powerful. If you're, again, seeing it from the other end, where it takes sometimes very, very long to have people make shifts. But if you're saying that that's possible in an hour and a half, amazing. So I'm in awe of this method. As you know, you and I have had conversations just being way together about it, and I've shared my experience. So if you were to leave a couple of words with viewers about what you do as a transformational coach and this method, what couple of words would you leave with them about this experience and why it's worth it to be able to experience this?
Well, first of all, I'm a mother of 3 children. And the effects of this method on my own psyche and my own life were that dramatic that the only thing I wanted to do was to share it with my 3 kids. Because I did not want them stuck in any cycle of self-sabotage and the inability to trust their own instinct and to do what's best for them and to love themselves in the way that they rightfully should. I didn't want any of those traces left as a result of how I'd raised them. So what I really want to share is as human beings, we deserve for the very best of our life to unfold.
Mm-hmm.
And many of us get caught up in the pain and the experiences we've been party to, without the understanding that the pain is only a small step towards its ultimate purpose. And that small step being that moment in time has arisen for you to dig deep to find the silver lining.
Mm-hmm.
And if you look for the silver lining, the only person that gets set free is you.
Mm-hmm.
So you have absolutely everything to gain and nothing to lose by attempting to go through a process like this. And the exciting thing is that if there is any part of you that is nervous, just be mindful and understand that it is fear that is driving you to be nervous. Because somewhere there's become a comfort in knowing sort of how to be unhappy and miserable and stay in that zone. But sometimes our biggest dread is stepping out of it into a life that has a lot more light in it and a lot more juice in it.
Sometimes the energy that it takes to be unhappy, the thought of not using that energy, where would it go? Sometimes that's a bit scary, kind of staying with what you know versus opening a door to some definite possibility or enlightenment is sometimes tough.
So it's not my reality, isn't it? That's why.
Yes, it is. So I would love for the viewers to know how to get a hold of you. I think you're still accepting people to come and see you. So let us know where we can get a hold of you. And if they have questions, I would love for them to reach out, because I think, I'm sure we're going to have a lot of questions about this. So let us know where people can get a hold of you.
Okay, so in terms of reaching me, I have a website, and on that website, I have a phone number on there so people can make phone calls and talk to me. I offer at least a 30-minute consultation. Often it runs up to about 45 minutes, complimentary, to talk through somebody's issue so that they can quickly see how they can help themselves and how something could be facilitated to move them along on their journey. Also on the website, which is www, and it's in my name, kindigill.com. So that's KINDIGILL.com. On that site, I have a small download too, which helps people to see at a cognitive level the 5 key concepts that need to be managed and addressed in order to have more of a happy and loving and fulfilling and peaceful life. And so that's available as a free download too.
Awesome. Well, Kindi, thanks so much. I've learned so much more. I felt like I'd had enough conversation, but obviously there's a lot more for me to learn about this method. And obviously it's bringing light in the world, which is what a nice place to be able to be honored to be able to give this to the world. Thanks so much for being on with Authentic Living with Roxanne. I hope that maybe in the future, maybe you can come back, maybe you can come back with Mata. Any possibilities would be great.
Fantastic. I'd love to learn about it.
Yes. And so for everyone, thanks so much for tuning in for Authentic Living with Roxanne. If you're needing anything further, you can reach out to me at roxannederhodge.com. Take care. Have a great evening. Bye-bye.
Thank you, Roxanne. Thank you, everybody out there.
Bye-bye.
Join Authentic Living with Roxanne every Thursday, 11 a.m. Eastern on Global Voice Radio.